Hey folks, welcome back. I'm here again with Fernando, and we're going to be discussing Yavanajataka yet again. This is our seventh video. We're discussing chapters 44 through 50, which deal with transits, which while I was reading them, I did not realize that. But Fernando, he updated me on that fact, and it made everything a lot more clear. Because if these weren't about transits, it would be really, really weird and schizophrenic. Actually, it is still kind of weird and schizophrenic, but that's okay because it's not about natal placements, it's about transits. So this is the transits video on Yavanajataka. Again, the oldest horoscopic text we have from India currently, at least as far as I'm aware, though there may be some debate about that at this point because the scholarship is always advancing and changing and whatnot. So welcome back, Fernando. Did you have anything to say before we screen share and jump into it?
Oh, no, not really. Just nice to see you again, and let's continue this adventure. And, when people talk about the idea that, this is the oldest one and we really don't know, I just think about all the papyrus that there's got to be like a ton of papyrus rolls, like hidden away in some temples and nobody gives a shit about them. And, they're just there rotting in the tropical weather. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, there's no way this is really the oldest one. I seriously...
Oh, man. Yeah, everyone I speak to, even Indians and people who have gone to Indians initiates, they just tell me, man, the quantity of works of astrological lore that are in India that have not even been translated, to Hindi.
Wow.
It's just very big. And I mean...
Same in Tibet, I think, too, with Tibetan Buddhist texts.
Definitely. And
there's thousands.
We could also say that about maybe there's got to be some things in Iran.
There's tons of things. I know that for a fact because I have a friend there. Yeah. Geez.
Yeah. Our Facebook friend. Yeah.
And, his son. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still believe that in India, maybe in Iran, maybe in Tibet, we have transcripts from works that probably were copies from Hellenistic astrology, and God knows all the knowledge that is there that's still just waiting to be discovered. Of course, we're not in that league. We're not in that.
No, we're not translators and scholars of ancient texts. Yeah.
But man, if I would love to do that. I mean, if I had
that'd be fun.
Preparation without a doubt. But yeah. Sfudishvaya. Whose original author was Yavanashvara,
Lord of the Greeks, supposedly.
We've discussed that in previous videos. So we move on to this chapters 44, 50, and it's basically transits. Oh, you're going to share the screen then?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But keep talking. Sorry, I just thought it was a good time to share.
Okay, I thought you weren't going to share it.
No, I am, but we're not going to go chapter by chapter.
Sure. I mean, this is a very simple series of just delineations in terms of the Gochara planets or transiting planets going over the natal planets. That's what I understood. That's what we've more or less agreed on because
I think so too.
As you said, the descriptions are not that easily understood from the get-go. You got to read it and then you realize, oh, these are transits. Yeah. But an important thing that I have to mention, although we've seen references of Ashtaka Varga before in previous chapters, there is no mention of Ashtaka Varga. And as I'm aware, Ashtaka Varga is the only way to really measure transits in Vedic terms, and there's no mention of it here. So there's also no mention of the important transits like Sadesati, although the descriptions of Saturn going over the moon, over the 12th and the 2nd from the moon, are more or less accurate with Sadesati predictions. So, I'll pass that, but it's very general, very general descriptive situations. And, I don't know what you wanted to add besides that.
Well, I guess first off is that for those of you watching this and possibly reading this, the reason we know it's transits is because at the end of each chapter, which I missed, and Fernando was like, oh yeah, it's at the end of the chapter. It says in the Yavanajataka, the transits of the sun.
And I didn't understand until I read at the very end.
Right, there you go.
Because you're going to see in sub chapters, for example, go to 44:12. 44:12.
Okay.
44:12.
There we go.
You see that it says, in the 9th sun causes anger, in the 10th of corruption, in this, in the 11th glory, and then it says, and in the 12th from Venus.
Yes.
So there, a lot of descriptions do not add this. There's another one in 18 about Mercury, but that's like the clue that gives you that he's talking about transits from the natal planet in position. In this case, the sun. Of course, this is kind of weird because he's not taking. I mean, as I said, he's not taking into consideration Ashtaka Varga, and I don't know if he's probably taking rulerships.
Well, but it's possible.
You just gotta work it. But yeah continue. Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, it's possible that this is like an early form of Ashtaka Varga or something that eventually kind of met.
But the thing is that
with Ashtaka Varga, because it's similar in the sense that, like, sometimes the 12th house transit is very good, right? Sometimes the 9th house transit is very bad. Sometimes the conjunction transit is very bad. So,
I was getting some water. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, it's like sometimes the different transits, like the transit of the 12th is very good, or the transit of the 9th is very bad. And that's something, and it mixes it up. And that's something we do find in Ashtaka Varga, but, neither you or myself have, like, gone through this systematically and tried to, like, correlate it with Ashtaka Varga.
But the thing is that he's already mentioned Ashtaka Varga. Mm-hmm. We've mentioned that, and not descriptive, but he has mentioned the word, and we've said that maybe it's been corruption of the text. We don't know, but to mention transit without mentioning Ashtaka Varga after you mention Ashtaka Varga in the previous chapters, it's
kind of strange. Yeah.
I mean, because Ashtaka Varga seems like it's kind of modern, maybe in terms of when this was written, not in the sense of the modern concept as we know it academically, just the idea that it's prior to Yavanajataka. Yeah. But these chapters are very general, very descriptive. I mean, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time here.
No, and we're not going to go chapter through chapter for those watching because, again, it's just the same thing. The way it works is that it takes every planet through a transit from itself and then from every other planet, right? So it'll be the sun from itself, the sun from Saturn, the sun from Jupiter, and so on and so forth. And we do find certain themes that repeat. Like one thing I want to point out that I took heavy notice of is every single transit in the 11th place from a planet is very, very positive, except one, which was Saturn from the moon for whatever reason. But the reason I wanted to point this out is because
usually is very good.
That's what they say. I don't know. Yeah. I haven't tested. To be honest, I haven't tested that enough to.
Well, that's a Vedic principle.
That's an Ashtaka Varga principle. Yeah.
No. It's a Vedic principle from Shani's transit, because Shani.
No, it's based on Ashtaka Varga, as I understand it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. If it is, okay, cool.
Yeah, Saturn does well in the 3rd, 6th, and 11th.
3rd, 6th, and 11th.
That's Ashtaka Varga. Saturn stuff, yeah. Okay. Anyway, and that's fine. That's an interesting idea.
By the way, in theory, this is in theory. Not all charts are gonna apply like this, but in theory, he does well in the 11th, 3rd, and 6th.
Right, in theory,
you might get a 1 or a 0 in that.
By transit, specifically, not by natal position. And Ashtaka Varga is very, very good. I like Ashtaka Varga. But this 11th house idea that all the planets are doing very good transiting the 11th from any other planet, this is definitely a huge influence from Hellenistic astrology, where the 11th house is literally the most auspicious house in the whole chart. It signifies the bonus daimon, which is the good spirit that guides you in life. And tons of Hellenistic authors talk about how the 11th is so good that even malefics there can't do any harm, and stuff like they exaggerate it a bit, but they're
and believe it or not, that's been transmitted to Vedic astrology. The planets in the 11th do good, although it's a Trishadaya, but
right, it has some negative.
Yeah. And if it has a negative connotation, it's from a spiritual point of view, and the idea that it's the 12th from a perspective. And if I'm not mistaken,
6th from the 6th, yeah.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, the 11th is the rejoicing of Jupiter or the sun.
Yes, Jupiter rejoices there. Jupiter. So,
which is the house of the good diamond also, correct?
Yeah, Jupiter naturally signifies that, in contrast to the 12th and Saturn, which signify the malus daimon, which is the bad spirit.
The demon and the angel.
And actually, it was funny. I saw a great example of bad spirit 12th house in a horary chart. A person asked. I won't reveal too many details, but it was in a Facebook forum. But they had asked what to my mind was a very questionable question about a public figure, based on kind of an outlandish conspiracy theory, and I think watching Fox News. And
what conspiracy was it?
I don't want to say.
Come on.
I don't know. It had to do with the judge, one of the judges in the Supreme Court.
Oh yeah, that he was killed.
Being dead.
Yeah, the Catholic one.
No, not him. The woman who has cancer.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah. That she's secretly dead and they're keeping it from us. But man, in the horary chart, this person's ascendant lord was conjunct the sun in the 6th in Aquarius, and the sun was the 12th lord, and I just was like, this is a really good example of how the 12th will just totally screw your mind up. Not only is Mercury the significator of objectivity and intellect, but it was the ascendant lord, so it was a double significator of okay, why did the person ask this question? It's 12th house influence. That was the influence. So, and
in the 6th,
good example of
so he's not
bad daimon.
In a good place, yeah.
No, not at all. So, no offense to that individual if they ever watch this. I think it was an interesting chart, and I enjoyed looking at it and delineating it in the forum. But I think that that kind of says a lot about the motives for asking the question. So, anyway, that was a little bit of a diatribe here, but the 11th is exceedingly good in these chapters. And then you get some other interesting themes, a lot of times the 6th house transits will destroy a person's enemies, but it seemed for Venus's signs, 6th, if a planet was, I guess, transiting from Venus in the 6th, it wasn't really good, I noticed a lot. Or that the 2nd could be either very positive or very negative, and the 5th too. A lot of times the 5th was kind of negative, and that reminds me of Parashara's 144 Bhava Yogas, where actually there are several situations where the 5th is kind of negative. And I always thought about this in the sense that the 5th can be negative because it's the house of confidence and risk and self-expression. And so 5th house heavy people don't necessarily fit into a mold. So they end up creating some trouble for themselves,
It can also it can also express itself through your children and how your children are disrupted to certain areas of your life because you have children.
Yeah, that's true too. But we see it here, sun in the 5th place from Mars, bile, fevers, old age, and illnesses of one's sons. And it's but then down here we see the opposite, right? 5th from Mercury, it causes beauty and destroys evil. So it does vary, but there are some interesting themes as you read these chapters. You start to and sometimes the 12th house is exceedingly good, sometimes exceedingly negative. Even the 9th and 10th house, can be. The 9th seemed to be more negative than positive most of the time, oddly enough, and the 10th was sort of it really depended, kind of middle of the road thing. But I don't know. Were you able to come up with any rationale for any of this? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm not alone then.
Yeah, because this is a project. You really have to spend time in this. If you want to do that, you got to spend the time and do a paper. There might be a logic to it. I agree with you with things of the 11th. I just saw, and
Yeah, okay.
there are some transit freaks out there.
This one's weird too, right? Saturn in the place of the sun gives happiness, money, joy. Why? Why would it do that? You would think it would do the opposite. And typically,
maybe it gives that through a lot of struggle, a lot of friction.
Yeah, because typically when Saturn transits a person's sun, opposes or squares it, those people have a pretty hard time. I mean, they might work really hard, but
I have a theory in terms of
they have a hard time.
Yeah, but I have a theory with these difficult transits. I mean, it's an obstacle, but if you overcome it and you manage it, it becomes a great asset. And this Saturn-Sun conjunction or opposition can create some difficult situations, specifically if they're in that dignity. But if the Jataka has the will to deal with it, I mean, they can be very powerful. So I guess that's the way I can deduce it. But what I wanted to say is to all the transit freaks out there, I'm not a transit freak. I usually use slow-moving planets, mainly Jupiter and Saturn, and then the nodes. So, I specifically paid attention to the Saturn-Jupiter transits because that's how I kind of do my predictions in terms of transits.
Sure.
And, as I said, you gotta spend some time, do a paper on it. But first of all, the information is it's organized, but you kind of don't. At first, I had difficulty realizing if he was meaning the planets in the natal chart in relation to the Goshara planets, or if he meant the Goshara in relation to other Goshara planets.
Okay.
He's not taking into consideration, he's just looking at it very unidimensionally, like just from one perspective. He's not seeing how other transits affect that transit, which we all know that, the combination of planets, that's the mixture you use to determine the proper meanings of the transit in terms of how it relates to the whole. So I just paid attention to the Saturn-Jupiter transits, and they were, I guess, okay.
Okay.
So, I really don't pay that much attention to slower moving transits or unless there are part of the periods one is in, because, real things happen with Saturn and Jupiter, in my opinion.
Sure. So, where's Jupiter now? It's in the
Jupiter's in Sagittarius.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we could look at some of that for fun. Like I kind of want to now that I know this is transits. I didn't last night when I was reading it. I kind of want to look and see my Saturn ones from my moon.
Yeah, let's do our Saturns and our Jupiters. How about that?
Yeah. Okay, but we do have
how about that? Catch me outside. How about that? Okay.
Oh God, good times on Dr. Phil. Okay, Saturn in the place of the moon, right? This is like similar to Sadasati, or this is Sadasati, right?
Yeah, I saw those.
Imprisonment, wandering, injuries.
Swords, holy shit, ninja, samurais.
And any of us who have practiced like even a little bit of Jyotish principles do know that Sadasati can be seriously debilitating for sure. I've seen it. You've seen.
I'm in it. You're starting, right? No, you're not.
I'll start it in a couple years. I went through it as a kid, but it didn't really do anything.
Me too. And I
was fine.
I'm still not clear how Sadasati applies when you have it as a baby. I got it when I was.
I don't know.
2.
Yeah, I would have been like
2 or 3.
I would have been like 1.
Yeah, that happens when your moon is in the 3rd or in the 4th.
Yeah, I mean,
and Saturn is in the
one thing I can say is that, like, probably toward the end of it, I would have to check because I'm not 100%, but probably toward the end of it is probably when my grandma was diagnosed with cancer and then died like a year or 2 later, right? And that was pretty traumatic for me. And that's a Sadasati type thing because the moon naturally represents mothers and grandmothers and things like that. So, I mean, but, like nothing insane happened. I mean, this time around I'm in Saturn Mahadasha, so who knows? Oh boy. Anyway, so, let's see. When Saturn was transiting the 10th, from my moon when it was in Sag.
By the way, Okay.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, in the 10th, it destroys one's lordship, the profits of one's actions, one's hordes, and produces disease and dishonor. I would say that.
I mean, is Saturn right here, right now in your chart?
No, this is where it was, and I want to just compare it to the 11th because it's been in the 11th for about a year. And when it was in the 10th, like, I mean, I definitely had a really hard time in many respects. And now that it's in the 11th, I mean, not right when it went into the 11th by any means, but in the past like 3-4 months, I think I've had some more positive things happen, giving glory. I haven't had other men's wives, but I shouldn't say that. Okay, I'm just not going to give any details there. It's like sort of, but not really. Wealth, slaves. I haven't gotten any slaves, but like I am getting with like the videos I'm doing, like these videos, other videos. Like I'm getting a little bit of the status and honor thing, right? Like so. I mean, it's now that it's like kind of more in the 11th from my moon, right? It's like it's giving more of that 11th stuff. What about for you? Where is it?
Saturn is right now second from my ascendant. From my moon is in the 12th. Are we doing from the moon or the ascendant?
Oh, I was doing from the moon, but you can do whatever you want.
From the moon is the 12th. So yeah, let's do it.
Do you want to read that? It's horrible. Oh, in the 12th, it takes away cleverness in one's actions, fame, brilliance, and honor. Just cuts everything away. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you want to do it from the ascendant?
If you are doing it from the moon, let's continue from the moon. I don't mind.
Well, I mean, that's all I'm, I mean, I'm done, that's it.
Yeah, let's go to Jupiter. Jupiter okay. from the ascendant this time.
Okay, where it's transiting now?
Right now it's in my Lagna.
Okay, so we'll go to the end of this chapter. I mean, I think, okay, yeah, just actually go ahead and then I'll say what I'm going to say.
Where is it?
Here it is. Jupiter in the ascendant.
Jupiter in the ascendant gives gold, cows, horses, sons, lands, children, knowledge, sexual intercourse, position, glory, and food. I think the most I'm getting is food and no cows nor horses. Dang it.
But man, what's cool about this transit for you is it's also in the 11th from your moon, right?
Correct.
Which is going to be, so it's like a double hit of something exceedingly auspicious. So I think this is a good way to, to use them. And I think that this is a form of Ashtaka Varga because he's also including the ascendant from all these.
Definitely.
And it's very similar to Ashtaka Varga in a lot of ways. It's just that it doesn't have the pointing system.
Exactly. That's what I meant.
Yeah, and maybe some of the other principles are slightly different. But we got to remember that, a lot of people think that Jyotish is somehow like this sacred, holy science that was all revealed in one fell swoop. But studying the Yavanajataka, we found evidence that the major yogas have evolved and changed over time, that Shadbala began very humbly and simply here, that the aspect doctrine began more simply here, and that things evolved over time. So by the time we get to what we call Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra, which I was just thinking about the other day, how much of a clusterfuck that text really is, even though it is a great text. It's kind of a clusterfuck.
And it is a clusterfuck because it is a recompiled book.
So we don't even know if that is the original text. Like,
there are a lot of things that are,
that just don't really fit in there. But in any case, like the obsession with mathematics and pointing systems, these things come later in both Hellenistic astrology and Indian astrology and Persian astrology. Like in the older texts of these traditions, like whether it's Jaimini does have a pointing system, but it's much simpler than anything you find in Parashara, right? Yavanajataka has no pointing system, and early Hellenistic texts really have no pointing system until we get to Ptolemy in Tetrabiblos, who gives a very simple pointing system for establishing the most powerful planet influencing a house. Very, very simple. But then in the Middle Ages, the Persians and
Persians.
and whatnot started adding some more complex pointing systems. And then in Tajika, which is an adaptation of Persian astrology, you get even more complex pointing systems. And then in Parashara, you get ridiculous stuff like Shadbala, which is just insane. It takes you longer to calculate the Shadbala than the freaking chart. And then the same with Ashtaka Varga. Ashtaka Varga is huge. To just calculate all the tables we can get with a click of the button, I can't imagine doing that. That would take hours, I think. Maybe if you were skilled at it, it might take like 1 solid hour of work, but it's a lot of work.
It would be easier to do Ashtaka Varga by hand than to do Vargas, for example.
Yeah, and to do Shadbala for sure. But Ashtaka Varga is still pretty complex and takes a lot of time and energy, but there's perhaps no evidence that I don't know if there's no evidence, but I'm willing to bet that whenever this text was written, the Ashtaka Varga he's talking about was not a pointing system. And, Ernst has talked about this, and I think maybe some other people have too, but that Ashtaka Varga is arguably its own system of delineation. And that these days we tend to like use it as an aside and as like an addendum and just like, oh, we'll use this for transits. But you can analyze a whole chart based on Ashtaka Varga, and it works very well.
And take that idea even further. You can analyze a chart using Shadbala only. And I've done readings.
You can. I'm not crazy about that.
I've done readings only with Ashtaka Varga.
Exactly. That doesn't surprise me at all, because it's
very simple stuff. Although very simple stuff.
But you can mix Ashtaka Varga with the basic principles of astrology, and I actually have a book, a PDF that pulled the Ashtaka Varga stuff from all these different texts, and you find in there like how to delineate in the context of Ashtaka Varga, still using the lords and the houses and stuff. It's very interesting. But my point is that regardless of like what you use and how you use it, my point is these highly mathematical things were a later addition and development, and we don't find them in the earlier texts. And personally, I like things to be as simple as possible with
and we have to remember that we have to put ourselves in the time of these writings, and these writings were made in a very magical time where people saw the world in a very different light. It was a very I don't want to say feminine perspective, but it was a more spiritual, more magical place where people probably saw life from a very different point of view, from the point of view that further developed in terms of a more logical, more mathematical perspective, life, more scientific,
more Aristotelian.
Yeah, and not only that, more pragmatic in many ways. So this is a magical world, and we have to realize that. And we also have to realize that these texts were not for the layman. These texts were for an elite. These texts were for practicing spiritual elite more than anything else. I mean, Joe Doe was working the land and dying of sickness while there was a priest reading these books in a tower. It's a different perspective from what we're doing today, without a doubt. And you have to realize that when you read these texts.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And my experience has been the simpler the methods, the more access I tend to have.
Usually, you're totally
my intuition.
Right. Totally
the more
right.
Computer stuff that I have, the less my intuition is active. That's just been my experience, though. Maybe
that's like very true. The simpler, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Jupiter in my 4th house, which is where it's transiting, gives success with regard to one's own dharma, a string of pearls, houses, and money. Well, that's great. I need some of that stuff. So.
Well, you just moved to a new house. So
I did. I got a part-time job pretty quick,
which is a very simple prediction of Jupiter in the 4th.
It is, yeah.
Jupiter in the 4th, there's something going to happen with your house, your mother, or your emotions. There you go.
Totally.
A positive way, probably.
But I think this chapter and Ashtaka Varga in general does open the door to delineating from every planet as a type of ascendant. I was thinking about this last night, and this is not something I would...
That idea has always been in my mind for forever.
Sure. This is not something I would necessarily do with every chart, but you could theoretically say, well, Saturn symbolizes like the endurance, durability, and longevity of things. So the second from Saturn symbolizes the durability of money and family, the fifth, children, and so on.
You could do that.
You could do that for each planet. Mars symbolizes like the valor, anger, courage, and blah blah blah. So the houses from it will relate to those those things. Yeah, so you could do that.
You usually do that as a secondary factor to add confluence.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a primary thing.
Correct.
You could tally stuff up. You could also use like the 12th parts and do stuff with that too, which would be interesting. Like, where does the 12th part of a planet fall from its natal position, right? Like if the 12th part of Saturn falls in the 10th from itself, right? That's going to mean, something for 10th house matters related to Saturn. Or if Mars falls in the 5th from itself, or 5th house things related to Mars, whatever, just kind of interesting stuff like that. As I'm talking about it, I'm like eager to test it out. It just sounds fun. But yeah, we pretty much, like we have, Venus and then Mars, and, I just don't think we need to go through all these chapters.
Yeah, we really don't know.
I think there was just like something interesting at the end of the moon one.
Yes, it kind of changed at the end.
Oh wait, sorry, it starts down here. So this got kind of weird. Like it's right
obviously
down
because
here. It's
the moon, and he left the moon for the last part, which was interesting too.
Yeah, he seems to always do that. Actually, stop. Okay. There are two possible influences due to the division of the world into an external and an internal one. If the moon is in its own hora, it produces a result which has not been thought of previously. But if it's in a hora of the sun, it always produces one which has been mentioned before. Okay? In the several signs, the moon always gives a result, either good or bad, which is in consonance with that sign or its navamsha. If Saturn aspects the moon in any planet's dwadasamsha or navamsha, even though that planet be benefic, it produces evil. Poor Saturn. If the moon is in a benefic planet's varga and is aspected by a benefic, it gives everything that has been predicted and destroys evil. In the reverse situation, it gives a worse evil. But if it is in the varga of a malefic planet without being aspected by one, it is always without influence at all.
And then you close the book and you throw it away and you say, fuck, I'm quitting astrology now.
Yeah, seriously, the end.
Yeah.
I don't know what any of that, well, some of it I get. Yeah, some of it I understand. Like,
yeah, at the beginning, but then...
What the heck? Like, what is this, the hora thing? Like, what was that,
Yeah, it's like, well, if it's in the sun, it's going to be okay. If it's in the moon, nobody knows. I mean, it's...
Yeah. And I don't like circular logic. I don't like sophistry. I don't like to inject things into...
What can we say about these passages? I mean, it's just very convoluted, very...
Yeah. But, somebody else could come along and just inject a bunch of circular logic into it and just say, well, like what this clearly means is that like when the moon is in the sun's forest, that has to do with our soul, it blah, 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 and go on this big diatribe. And it's like, guys, we don't even know if this translation is well done in this section or if the text is complete in this section for the person who translated it to have, so I don't know, but you see that all the time especially in Jyotish today, the Jyotish world, people just coming and being like, oh yeah, and this means this because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, where does it say that? It doesn't say that.
But you have to realize that people want that, because I've been with teachers that do not do that. And people just lose interest. People get frustrated. I've been with teachers that just don't go through that bullshit. I've been with teachers that say, well, look, this and that and that and this, that works, that this doesn't work. And everybody's like, oh, but what are the qualities of the moon and this and that? Well, I don't know. I'm just teaching you what works. And I've come to the realization that, you sometimes have to do that because people want to hear that. People want to hear the story. People want to hear the fantasy. People want to hear that conjecture, if you will, of these reasonings that go on in astrology that sometimes don't have to make sense. You know, some yogas don't make sense and they work.
And they work, yeah. And that, but it pisses off Westerners, I think, more than anybody, or people with a Western mentality. Like there's this whole thing where people are obsessed with
I just think it's the mentality more than the culture. It's more of the new agey modern perspective, the new agey psychological approach to astrology, which
which has permeated people in India too. It's not just Westerners at this point. So I shouldn't say that, but it's mostly Westerners.
That's very common, for example, in Hispanic American astrological communities. This idea of, you know, transpersonal psychology, biodynamic psychological approach to astrology, transpersonal evolutionary astrology. This idea of you know, of just working it from a modern perspective. The idea of evolution, which we've talked about. Because, you know, people want to feel safe in those paradigms. People want to feel comfortable in those paradigms because. You know, not everybody's built the same way. Not everybody's built to realize that, you know, death is inevitable and that's part of life. And we have to realize that we only live one life and we gotta take matters into our own hands. YOLO, exactly. I'm gonna tattoo that here in person. There's gonna be like a stripper, you know, the strippers they have in those trucks and the tires. Like, and here I'm gonna have like a blunt, and Krishna is going to be smoking the blunt. Yeah.
Oh man.
And he's gonna be surfing at the same time.
Oh, that would be a good avatar, like a good character, like a dude with those tattoos. But
we know the devil. But we'll continue with our discussion.
But I guess what I'm saying too is like people have.
But you understand what I meant, right? You know, that's the reasoning behind it. It's not and that's the thing. It's not a Western thing. It's a modern thing. You know, it's modernity is the antithesis to the real.
Yeah, modernity is mostly from people in the quote unquote Western world.
Well, no, the modern perspective comes from a minority, you know, like a chosen people, you know, people who have been developed in certain areas of academia and have set these ideas.
Yeah, but a lot of this comes from colonialism and the Industrial Revolution, and as you like to point out, Marxist thought and stuff like that, you know.
In a way, yes, but the idea of that supplanting the old traditional Western culture of Christianity and the old order, you know, you're true. You're true about that. But that came about from a subversive movement that produced different things that altered the traditional order in Europe, you know, especially through usury, especially through banking, especially through religious wars and that sort of thing. But we're digressing.
Religious wars, definitely. Anyway, what I wanted to say, we
got here from transiting planets. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Like, I mean, what I wanted to say though, and this is really important, is like, because a lot of people can read an old text like Yavanajataka and start projecting all kinds of modern Jyotish ideas into it that are not there. And you see this with Jaimini Sutras. There are many translations of Jaimini Sutras where the people try to make it fit the version in Parashara, which is a huge error. And that's why I like Ernst Wilhelm's translation, because it's very pure.
Parashara has a lot of crap that Jaimini does not apply. Yeah.
Right. So it's very pure, but I have some other, I've seen some other translations. I won't mention any names, but there are literally the shloka is translated with words that literally are not there in the Sanskrit because the person was projecting their own ideas based on how they learned it.
Oh, and Lars, this happens all the time when people are translating texts.
It does, yeah. So anyway, you have these schools of thought now that want to make everything in Jyotish somehow distinct and different so that it all works together. So people have these outlandish theories about what the karaka means. what the house lord means, what the Charakaraka means, what the Bhavat Bhavam means, and what the, ninth from like the sun and that kind of technique means.
And then you go to another teacher and then he has another way of saying it.
Yeah, and somehow all of these things are supposed to be used simultaneously and that they each refer to a very distinct, specific reality, basically implying that there's a one-to-one relationship with the events of reality and these elements in the chart, which couldn't be further from the truth because it's symbolical. It points you to the reality. It is not literally a symbolical representation of the reality, a one-to-one.
Although now we're getting into metaphysical aspects.
Yeah, we are.
Debatable.
But my point,
people debate that, but yeah.
Well,
but I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know what grounds they debated on, but anyway,
the idea that could the debate comes from the idea that those signs or those symbols either create the situation or announce the situation. That's the debate.
Oh, okay. Well,
in terms of do they produce the outcomes or are they representing the outcomes or just giving a signal of them? Do you know what I mean? In terms of prime cause of the situation.
Yeah, I've heard that debate, and
which is something metaphysical now.
It's possibly one of the most elementary debates I've ever encountered. So I don't even want to speak to it because
okay, cool.
It's ridiculous. But anyway, so
well, I mean, it's not ridiculous. It's just metaphysical. It's just.
I find it ridiculous. But anyway,
because which one do you agree with?
It's kind of more the symbolical one, but there's also sort of a both and in there.
Yeah.
But in any case,
I believe that in that sense, it's whatever you want to believe in. So.
Okay, well, I mean, based off of like all the ancient like wisdom traditions that I've studied, none of them imply that it's somehow like beams of energy being shot out of the zodiac and the planets and causing things to happen, like in that way.
That's more of a, I don't know,
it's an Aristotelian kind of model, I would say. Like, I mean, and I think that's where Ptolemy was getting some of that from as well. And I really don't like Aristotle. I have like a lot of just disdain for Aristotle and what he talked about. So maybe that's my bias. But the point I'm trying to make is that like there's no evidence that all of these techniques were ever supposed to be all used side by side. They're different ways to approach the chart. Jaimini is a complete system unto itself. It was never meant to be supplemented and combined with Parashara style astrology. There's just no evidence for that. And so, but we're getting this all the time. And when you look at like I was reading Hart Defoe's text, Hart Defoe and Robert Svoboda co-wrote two wonderful texts. And I was reading the second one, Light on Relationship, about synastry. And basically in that text, he mentions how like you can look at, the fourth lord, let's say for the mother, and the moon for the mother, okay? But that in his practice, he would prioritize the fourth lord over the moon, and that the moon is less important, and it's just sort of like a general indicator that you look at for confluence. And I thought, oh, Eureka, this is exactly how I like to do things too. And now I have a more clear direction on which one to take, take the house lords because they're more individualized to that person who was born at that time. Whereas everything else is going to span a day or a few days, right? And be the same, at least by sign. And so, Hart's lineage and whatnot, Hart and Robert's lineage is pretty traditional Jyotish lineage and whatnot. And, I don't know how far back it goes, but the point is like that, the way they are doing Jyotish is a more like holistic and like ancient way of doing it, even though they use things like Shadbala and whatnot, but they still have this, Hart taught palmistry as well and practiced palmistry alongside, taught omens, taught like rice grain stuff and Ayurveda and all that stuff. Whereas in today's world, like a lot of people are being trained in Jyotish that is this like trying to take all the techniques from all the different types of Jyotish and say, oh, they all refer to distinct things and they can all be used together, but they each refer to distinct things. And I think that to me, that's just, totally reductionistic and not holistic. So, you know, power to you if you want to do it that way. I just get a headache doing that. So don't read Yavanajataka with that mentality, though. That's the point of this. Don't read Jaimini with that mentality. Read them as they are.
You can't read old text from a modern perspective. You have to place yourself in the moment and time where this body of work was produced, and you have to do that with everything, with literature, with fiction, nonfiction, astrology, whatever you want to do, even philosophy,
even philosophy,
even any type of work you want to do in academia. And you know, to add to what you said, you know, people have to find what works for them, right? And people, and not everybody is built the same way, and people have to look and read and learn and find whatever works for them. And just be happy with that, and just explore and do your practice. In the end, it doesn't matter what you do. When you do a reading, there are higher forces at work through you.
Yeah, and if you do it well through the techniques you're using, that's all that matters. We should always just be concerned with what works in practice over what is like politically correct, as far as, oh, well, 2,000 years ago they were doing it this way. Like, you know, I think there's a lot of great things about Shadbala, for example, right? Even though it's a more modern innovation. So I'm by no means saying like get rid of Shadbala, get rid of pointing systems, not at all. But just realize that when you read these old texts, Jaimini and Yavanajataka and even some other old Jyotish classics that I'm not as familiar with, you don't assume that, oh yeah, like they had this same system of Ashtaka Varga or Shadbala. Like they probably didn't. You know, they
probably didn't.
Unless you see the evidence for it, right, directly, they probably didn't. So
because people have to realize that Jyotish was never the same. It wasn't like a monolith of wisdom. It's something that evolved.
Right.
It's something that grew. It's something that got influence from other cultures. And the same way could be said of other astrological cultures. You know, we have to realize that, yes, there's a spiritual side to it, without a doubt, but the idea that it was like a monolith of wisdom that was given to us by the gods, you know, you see that in Hellenistic astrology also with Pseudoepigrapha, and you have Pseudoepigrapha also in Jyotish, and that's something that we have to take into consideration, and it doesn't affect the tradition, it doesn't affect the teachings, it doesn't affect the culture, it's just a fact, right?
Right.
And you know, when we start dealing with religious precepts, then we are getting into a place where some people can be very sensible about it, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Jyotish, it's like the sixth Vedanga, the sixth limb of the Vedas, and as I've seen, it's like an auxiliary part of bigger Vedic precepts that are not questioned here. The thing is that Jyotish is something that evolved through time, that it's evolving right now.
Yeah.
And if it's evolving in the 20th century, it has a lot to do with modern astrology more than anything else.
Oh, big time. Yeah, there's a lot of modern astrological principles from America and Britain that have made their way into the Jyotish community in India.
Yeah, we've talked about this through the nodes.
The nodes, sign meanings, even like modern psychological sort of sign meanings.
The idea of the relationship between the houses and the signs, and how some houses take relation from the signs, which is something very modern.
And it's not good or bad. It just is. It's just like
it's history.
The point is, we just have to recognize what's going on and not have this false mentality about the way things are. And, you know, on that note, for example, like ancient Jyotish as found in the Vedas, like the nakshatras found in the Vedas and whatnot, it's not horoscopic astrology as we understand.
Correct. And it's very, unfortunately, it's very cloudy.
It's uneven. It's uneven nakshatras. It's uneven.
We really don't know anything like traditional about the nakshatras, other besides obviously the deities,
their names and their deities, and even the deities associated with them are not questionable.
Vedic.
Well, they're not Vedic. They're found in the Brahmanas, which are Vedic commentaries on the Vedas, which doesn't mean that they're not very profound and useful and old. It just means they're not Veda, and Veda is a very specific thing. Veda is like Quran. It basically means something that's heard or revealed. Okay, so the four Vedas are rather unique in the history of Indian philosophical and spiritual literature in that respect. But my point is like in the ancient Vedas, you have an uneven division of nakshatras, right? You have the nakshatras being used more for like ritualistic purposes and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have any sort of horoscopic system of houses and, you know, and the signs and the planets interacting with aspects and divisional charts and stuff like that. There's not sufficient evidence of that. So again, you know, people like to call it Vedic astrology, which is actually a modern,
very modern,
and I don't like that name at all. Real Vedic astrology would be
it's Hindu astrology.
It's practiced from the Vedas, using the nakshatras and the planetary positions to
which is not horoscopic. It's not.
No, it's not. And so that would be like real Vedic astrology in a sense, you know, on just a mundane sense. But yeah, no, I think this was a interesting aside that we had here in this video. So I think unless you have anything else to add, we should just wrap it up.
Build a wall.
Man, you got to stop saying that in these videos.
You know, the other day I was reading.
Build a wall around my fist.
What does that even mean? I was reading cards and a client told me that. And I you know, I'm professional, so I didn't say anything about it, but that was very funny.
Sure, yeah.
We were talking about, you know, the states and everything, and at the end, he was kind of drunk also, so it was very funny. But
good times.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing else to say. I mean, Gosharas, something I want to say before we finish. Transits are always secondary to time periods. Yeah. And that's very traditional. A lot of people who are like who are aficionados or amateurs in astrology sometimes don't realize this, but transits are secondary to time periods. That doesn't mean that transits are irrelevant. It's just like a secondary or a tertiary thing you do to confirm what you're doing. So always remember that. And that's something I always say in terms of transits.
Cool. Very good advice. And otherwise, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please hit like, hit share, hit subscribe. Check out Fernando's channel and website as well in the description. And otherwise, we'll see you next time, where we'll cover the chapters in Yavanajataka where he delineates Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto transits. So stay tuned for that. Okay.